Hello and welcome back to ADO Programming in C#. The following will be our objectives for today. Understand what is ADO.NET and why do we need them. Connecting to a database server. Understanding the ADO command object and working with stored procedures. From early times of programming, data has always been persisted to a database. And RDBMS is the proven and most widely accepted technology in the world today to persist data. We know that in a RDBMS, data is stored in the form of rows inside a table. Why is RDBMS so popular? Well, it's because RDBMS guarantee the integrity of the data at any point of time. In an RDBMS, we establish relationship between the tables and the data, and the integrity and the constraints can never be violated at any point of time. This storage format and the integrity guarantee that the RDBMS has provided has made it the preferred choice the world over for data storage. And the natural language of the RDBMS is SQL. In our programs, we think in terms of objects, and in an RDBMS, data is stored in the form of tables, as rows and columns inside a table. We need someone who could bridge the gap between our objects and then the SQL in the RDBMS. And that is what ADO.NET provides. ADO.NET forms a bridge between the C# code and the SQL code. We have multiple RDBMS vendors, the leading ones being Microsoft with SQL Server, MySQL, IBM with DB2, and Oracle Corporation. How do we guarantee that our C# code written and tested against the RDBMS, say SQL Server, will run the same against another database, say the Oracle database? To solve this problem, the C# language provides us with the data provider. A data provider is a set of ADO.NET classes that allow access to a specific database, execute SQL commands on that database, and retrieve the data. The data provider is a part of the ADO.NET library, and it is a bridge between your application and the data source. The .NET framework provides a four set of providers: SQL Server provider for optimized access to the SQL Server database, Oracle provider for optimized access to any Oracle database, and then we have the OLEDB provider and the ODBC provider. In order to interact with an appropriate RDBMS, we need to use the corresponding data provider. Switching databases from one vendor, say IBM, DB2 to Oracle, is as simple as using a different data provider. Okay, so let us look at some important classes in the ADO.NET library. First and foremost is the connection. This object is used to establish a connection to the data source. Next is the command. The command is used to execute SQL commands and store procedures. The data reader provides a fast read-only, forward-only access to the data retrieved from a query. A data adapter is used to fill a data set with information extracted from a data source. Then the changes done in the data set can be applied to the data source. ADO.NET comprises the following namespaces: system.data, system.data.common, system.data.SQL client, and then the system.data.SQL types. The connection object. The connection object represents the connection of the database. To connect to a database, we need a connection string. A connection string is shown in the example here. A connection string comprises of three parts: the server location, the credentials for the connection, and the database name. The constituents of connection string are as follows: the server name, which is the DNS name or the IP address, the credentials for the connection, and the database name. For example, we have server equal to whatever is the host name, and if it's a SQL Server Express edition, we specify Express, and then trusted connection, yes or no, if you're going to use Windows authentication or SQL Server authentication. If Windows authentication, we say trusted connection equal to S, and the database is equal to the DB name. With this information, it is possible for the C# code to use the chosen data provider and connect to the database. Okay, once we have the connection string, we can create a connection using the new connection. Once we create the connection object, we open the connection using the open method. Since the connection is an expensive resource, it is always a good practice to close the connection in the finally block. Okay, let us look at the example of working with ADA.NET. Please download the source code from the portal and follow through with the examples. Let me bring up Visual Studio and open the source code which is downloaded from the portal. File, open project, and okay, here is the source that is downloaded from the portal. And before we begin, I would request you to open up your SQL Server client and run the following commands. Number one, first open your client, connect to your database server, and then once you're on the database server, execute this command, drop database studentdb. Let me say use master. Okay, and then drop the database student database. Okay, then create the database called student database. Drop database studentdb. Create the database called studentdb. First use master, drop database studentdb, and then create a database called studentdb. Now use studentdb and then create a table called student. This table has three columns. The first column is the ID column, then we have name and admission number. Name is a varchar, not null field. Admission number is also a varchar and it is not null field. ID is the primary key and it is auto-generated. Identity means it is auto-generated and it starts from 1 and is incremented by 1. Whenever we insert records into the student table, we need not specify the ID. SQL Server by default generates the ID and inserts it to the table. Okay. Then let's look at a stored procedure. A stored procedure is a group of SQL commands which you wanted to execute as one unit. For example, when you insert a student, we want to get back the ID of the student. So that requires two operations. The first operation is the actual insert into the student table, and then we need to fetch back the value of the ID column of the inserted record. So this insert and select are an ideal candidate for a stored procedure. So to create a stored procedure, we say create procedure, the name of the stored procedure, and then the name and admission number are the input parameters to the stored procedure. Okay, they are specified by the @name and the @admission number. And @studentID is a output variable. Since it is output variable, we have to explicitly specify it using the output keyword. So once we define the input and output parameters, we use the as to define the body of the stored procedure. Insert into student table, name and admission number. Values are the input parameters @name and @admission number. Once we have inserted, we want to copy the value of the identity column into the student ID. Okay. So this is a simple stored procedure which we will be using in the demo code. So create the stored procedure by selecting this particular block of statements and doing a execute SQL. Thus the stored procedure has been successfully created. So to summarize what we've done so far, we dropped the database called studentdb, we recreated it again using a create database, and then we created a table called student with three columns. Number one, ID, name and admission number. ID is the auto-generated column of type identity. Then we created a stored procedure with three parameters, two are input parameters and one is an output parameter. So a stored procedure is used to execute more than one SQL statement as one unit. Here what we did is we inserted records into the student table, the name, admission number, and fetched back the identity of the just created row. And that value we set it as the output parameter. Okay, so once we're done, our database is ready. Now let's look at the code, C# code. Let's look at how to use the insert. First and foremost, we need a connection string. My connection string is given as below. My server name and my connection credentials, the trusted connection, and my database name is StudentDB, which we just created just a while ago. Okay. So insert record method, what it does is it takes two input parameters, name and admission number. Okay, and then it creates a connection using the connection string. We define a SQL to execute on the database, okay, and then create a new SQL command. Okay, then we in the try block we open the connection and then we say execute non-query. Execute non-query is used to execute commands that manipulate the data like insert, update and delete. Okay, so this will insert a record into the student table with the given name and admission number. Remember, this method will not return back the ID for you. Suppose we want to insert a record and also get back the ID of the newly created record, then we have this method. We have this method using a stored procedure. To use a stored procedure, what we do is we create a connection again using the connection string, and then the SQL command instead of a SQL is the name of the stored procedure, and then we specify the command type as to be a command type stored procedure. This is a very important distinction between a normal SQL and a stored procedure. Command type equal to stored procedure set only for stored procedures. Then since we have three parameters, we define those parameters in the command at name, at admission number and at student ID. Name is of type varchar, admission number is also of type varchar, and student ID is of type integer, and we specify the length of those parameters. Once we define the parameters in the command, we set the values with the value which is passed in, the student name and the admission number using the value. Then afterwards we open the connection, the try block, we say execute non-query because it is a DML. Once the query is executed, we get back the student ID which was inserted from the command.parameters at student ID. At student ID, we know it's a output parameter as specified in this section. So we say give me back the student ID from the parameters, and that is the ID of the newly created record. So this is a very simple and similar to the normal executing stored procedures are very simple and as similar as it can to be the executing normal SQL commands. Only difference is we specify the name of the stored procedure in the SQL command, and then we say the specific command type is a stored procedure. Then we define the add parameters, and then we specify the direction for the output parameter. Once done, we call execute non-query and get back the output parameters using the square notation. Okay, so let's run this program to see it in action. Before we go to run this program, we also need to understand the select. Okay, so in the select, what we do is we have a SQL string, select ID, name, admission number from student, and then we have a new connection with the connection string which is the same as in the previous example. We open the connection in the try block and then we say execute reader. Execute reader returns as a SQL data reader. The SQL data reader allows us to read the records in a forward only manner. So we loop through the data reader and keep on reading rows, and for each row we print the column values using the reader of column name, reader of column name which is name, reader of column name which is admission number. So read DB values is a very simple example which will read the DB values for given SQL and then using the execute reader. Okay, so the knowledge of these two, the insert and then select, let's run a sample program. So what we do here is we first insert a record called student 1, student 2, student 3, 4 and 5, and then we fetch the DB values. Now we insert another student using the stored procedure. The name of the student is now student-sp-1, and then the student admission number is 100. Now we print the values one more time. Let's run this program to see it in action. Okay, so what we did is we had 5 students, 1, 2, 3, 4 and 5, and we executed them using the method execute non-query, and we also executed a stored procedure. Okay, and so our output says we first inserted 5 records, 1, 2, 3, 4 and 5 are the IDs, and after the stored procedure was called, the 6th student is called student-sp-1 and his admission number is 100, and that student's ID is number 6. So this is a very simple example for creating records in the database using either a SQL command or a stored procedure. Now let us say we want to read a single particular value from the database. For that, what we do is we can C# allows us to specify values to a command dynamically using parameterized commands. Here what we do is we define the SQL string, select ID, name, admission number for student, where ID equal to, we specify a student ID. This student ID is going to be dynamic, can keep on changing as the program executes. So for that purpose, to notify dynamic values, we use the add notation. Once we use add notation, we need to add that parameter to the command using the command.parameters.add with value student and then pass a particular ID. Once we are done defining the command with the parameter, we do an execute reader and we read the data. So let's go back to our learning. The command object allows us to execute any SQL against the database, and using a connection string and with the connection object we form a SQL command. A SQL command can allow us to execute either a non-query, scalar or a reader. A non-query is used to execute statements such as commands that insert, delete or update records. A scalar is used to execute commands that return a single value. These are generally used for executing aggregate select commands, and that uses functions like count or sum or average or which calculate a single value. An execute reader executes a select query and returns a data reader that gives us a read-only, forward-only cursor. For example, to execute the scalar, an example could be, the SQL could be select count of star from employees, and we say execute scalar. To execute a non-query, which is an insert, update or delete query against the database, we use the command.execute non-query. And a data reader allows us to read the data from a SQL command one row at a time in a forward only manner. For example, select star from students and we say SQL command.execute reader. This gives us the data reader, and call read method gives us the current row, advances the cursor row by row. So each read gives us a single row, and on that row we can get the specific column values using the column syntax, reader of salutation or reader of get string of index. There are different ways you can access the column values, either using the index or the column name. The reader also has methods to get the specified data type. For example, you can get string of 1, you can get int32 of 2, you can get a datetime value, you can get a boolean value. The conversion from a database value to a C# object value is done using the corresponding get methods. Parameterized commands are used to supply dynamic values to a query. For example, if we have a query which says select star from student where student ID equal to a dynamic value, we specify it using an @student ID. Then when we create the command, we need to add the parameter. Once this is done, we need to execute the command execute reader to get the SQL reader. Stored procedure is a batch of one or more SQL commands that are stored in the database. Stored procedures are well encapsulated blocks of logic that can accept data through input parameters and return data through output parameters. Stored procedures execute more than one SQL statement as one unit. A typical example is to insert a row in a table which is the identity column and fetch back the identity value of the inserted row, written in the output variable. To call a stored procedure, we specify the name of the stored procedure in the SQL command and set this command type as command type stored procedure. Then the different SQL parameters are defined using the add method, and then the values are set. Any output variable is specified using the parameter direction.output. Then once this is done, we do execute non-query, and then for the output values we access them using the parameters array using the value of the output variable. So we saw the insert and then the select. Let's also look at the delete command. The delete demo has a method which says delete all records. So the SQL string is delete from student, and we define a command object, new command, SQL command, open the connection, okay, and then we say execute non-query because it is a delete command. A delete command is one which manipulates the data in the table, so it is a execute non-query. So let us run all the examples combined together. Okay, so what we do here is we create records student 1, 2, 3, 4 and 5, then check the values in the database, then again create a stored procedure, okay, with the input parameters student sp-1 and the admission number is 100, okay, then read the DB values to make sure that the stored procedure has inserted the record properly. Then we do a count of the total number of students in the student table, then delete all the records, and then again we do a count to verify that the count is 0. Okay, so already we have 6 records in the table, so let's add some more. Okay, here we are. we inserted some records. Now total number of records inserted is number 11. Okay, and then we inserted 2 records using the stored procedure. Look at this one. The identity column keeps on incrementing. Okay, so we have total number of students as 12, 6 from the first run and the 6 from the second run, which we do in now, and then we delete all the 12 records and we fetch the count is now 0. Okay. So here's the summary. ADO.NET is the bridge between the C# code and the SQL code that executes the database server. ADO.NET provides a data provider to work with MS SQL databases. It also provides different data providers for database servers like Oracle and DB2. The connection class is used to provide a connection to the data source. It needs the location of the database server, the name of the database, and the security scheme and the credentials connected to the database. The command object lets us execute commands on the database, and stored procedures enable us to execute more than one statement in the database. They provide a mechanism for returning more than one value from the database to the calling program. So this is a very small lesson, but nonetheless very important. RDBMSs are the fundamental storage mechanism it will be used in most of the applications. So take your time to get familiar with the database, SQL Server, ADO.NET classes, and you'll make a very good programmer. Thank you. Hope you enjoyed this lesson, and we'll see you soon.